We are continuing our conversations at the Gaborone International Conference Center here in Gaborone, where we are at the 7th Botswana International HIV/AIDS Conference 2018, and one of the participants and speakers at the conference is the UNAIDS Botswana Country Director. Can you kindly introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Jyothi Raja Nilambur Kovilakam.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving us the time to talk.
My pleasure.
In your conversation inside the main hall, you mentioned how important it is for community to be involved in all aspects of these conversations around HIV and AIDS. Please tell us a little bit more of why it is important that these HIV/AIDS messages and the data that has been collected by experts such as you is distributed to the people.
No, thank you. It's a very critical question because two angles of it. Without community, it is very hard for us to actually, any disease in that matter, to kind of make sure that they actually have access to services and they will access that services.
Right.
And if you really look at any of these diseases, particularly HIV, STI, even
right.
to some extent TB, or even non-communicable diseases, if you look at them, they're all associated to the behavior.
Right.
And if you wanted to touch on somebody's behavior, you have to actually bring those whom you wanted to kind of address their behavior to be in the decision making. So I think a community response, bringing the community at the center of the response, is extremely critical. And if you look at anywhere you have actually seen a success story, a
yes.
good practice or a promising practice,
right.
it is very strongly coming with a community engagement.
Right.
If you look at the history of making treatment access to everyone, including to Africa, it is particularly because the people living with HIV actually advocated for it.
Right.
So they have a huge voice and a huge role and accountability to play.
Right.
And if you kind of avoid them, and if it is the conversation without them, I think we are missing a big piece. And that's why bringing a community at the center of the response is very critical. And you might have heard this, for us, without if you're planning anything for us,
right.
it should be with us.
It
should not be without us.
That's right.
And that is particularly applicable to people that we kind of traditionally call them as key populations, who are not really the mainstream of the society normally. People such as sex workers,
right.
people such as men who have sex with men,
that's right.
prison inmates, transgender populations,
migrants,
mm-hmm. So where you have to actually provide the voice of the voiceless. So one, you have to bring them in as part of the response,
mm-hmm.
and also bring them as part of the decision making.
Right.
So are they sitting at the decision making table in terms of where the programs need to be, and where we have to emphasize more, and where we have to actually put more resources,
right.
where the resources are not really used, where there are stockouts. I think they can play a major role as community. So including the data, which you are kind of referring to, your
yes.
second part of the question,
yes.
was actually if you have a lot of data in terms of epidemic, where we are doing, where the new infection is happening, where it is, the treatment uptake is actually low, and whom,
right.
I think we will have that, we will have a privilege to have that access, but to certain kind of group of people,
right.
which can be sometimes experts, which can be policymakers,
mm-hmm.
which can be to some extent program managers, but it is not really kind of made into a digestible form for community.
I think you've put a very important part by saying digestible, that it's packaged for the everyday person, because I've been listening in, and the information and the terminology, is very high. Mm-hmm. So I like that you're saying it should be packaged for the community so that they're able to consume it.
Yes. So if you're meeting, for example, a taxi driver,
yes.
how do you explain that?
Right.
And then if you have a grandmother in your
right.
home, you cannot actually go and sit with your grandmother about all these, prevalence data say this, new infection data say this, but
right.
they all have, actually you have to pass it in a language or in a form that is digestible to, so tailor your message according to your target audience. And particularly for these issues, like if you want sex workers community to be with you for taking this, you have to make it into a form that it is actually understood by them.
Yes.
And they also have the equal capacity, like a technician, like an expert, because they are also having their own expertise.
Right.
So you actually
Right.
bring them on the table as a partner.
Right.
Not actually as kind of end user only. You bring
trickle
them
down.
trickle down. You know where if you look at the history of rural development,
Yes.
the participatory rural appraisals are always done with the community.
Absolutely.
And for the community.
Absolutely.
So I think for even health or HIV in general, I think we have to sit with the community.
Yes.
Find what is the need,
Mm-hmm.
and then also to say that, okay, now this is what the program is saying, where we want to improve.
Right.
And also at the same time, you also might have heard like stockouts, which
Yes.
is a common problem for
Yes.
like either it can be condoms, it can be test
Yes.
kits, it can also be drugs.
Yes.
And sometimes maybe the facilities may not be actually giving that information so rapidly, but with the engagement of community and the civil society, they can do much better because they can give you a very quick information
Of their actual experience that will suit them consuming the products. You also mentioned, now that you've mentioned resources, that there are a lot of resources in our region for HIV and AIDS and tuberculosis, but maybe we need to be using them more appropriately. One thing that you mentioned is that health systems on their own are already stretched. So it is time for community systems to come together with the health system to kind of give a more effective response.
Absolutely. I think when you talk about resources, I think you might want to actually kind of look at, one is the financial resources,
Right.
the other one is the human resources.
Absolutely.
Now, the financial resources, you're absolutely right. The Southern and Eastern Africa region is actually to some extent privileged
Yes.
to have financial resources available. The donors were actually kind of continuing their investments in HIV and together with TB.
Right.
So I think it is actually a good picture, though there was a kind of a little bit decline compared to some, before 2010.
Right.
But I think it is still okay for us. Now, I think in that we have to improve or look at more into three pieces, in my opinion. One is actually kind of looking at, are we investing to the right things?
Right.
Whether the efficiency part of it, like are we investing, smartly?
Yes.
And if we are not investing smartly, maybe it is time for us to stop that and put that money into something which is having a bigger impact, which is
Right.
showing higher impact.
Right.
Second one also is to look at, there are different partners who are getting these funds. Are they having enough absorptive capacity? Are they absorbing these funds? Sometimes you will have a lot of money and only the last quarter or the last month, everybody is in a panic mode to spend the money.
Right.
And it may not be going to the right activity. It might be like, just go and do a big procurement, for example, which may not be very a smart thing to
Targeted to any solution.
Exactly.
There.
And I think the third piece is also about, in terms of financial kind of investment, is just checking and tracking the financial resources.
Right.
I think we normally talk about, we will have a lot of data on program, but we always miss the financial part a little bit or keep it a little bit kind of, behind.
Right.
In a sense that, you may not have done, maybe the program data, you might get it like every year. But the financial data, maybe 4 years or 3 years,
Right.
you're not exactly running it simultaneously. So I think in order to look at our financial resources, these three things we have to really do. And that also in a way to forecast. So for example, if some donors currently who are with us, and maybe down the line, 5 years or 6 years down the line,
Yes.
they might transit. So
Right.
are we actually prepared for it?
Right.
In a way, forecasting. That's why this tracking is very important. Now, particularly, for example, Government of Botswana, it's a major contributor
Yes.
into the AIDS response.
Right.
Now, there are Global Fund and PEPFAR is also contributing currently.
Yes.
If they kind of continue for some more years, well and good. And if some years are later, if they say, okay, we are actually slowly rolling down, now Government of Botswana need to know it already.
Right.
Now they have to also plan, in a way, forecast it and say, okay, this is our plan for next 5 years or next 10 years. So I think tracking this financial data is very critical,
right,
especially for all the partners around it.
And especially when we're talking sustainability going into
Sustainable
the future.
financing.
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
The one word about the human resources, I think, as you know, countries like Botswana, we are a little bit challenged with the human resources, especially in the healthcare settings. Now, what we wanted to do, that's why, the community system strengthening will be an answer to it.
Right.
Because things that cannot be done always with an expert, engagement, for example, dispersing medicines to ARV patient,
right,
if they are stable, if there are no opportunistic infections, and if the patient is stable, you don't always need to have a doctor or a nurse dispersing these medicines.
Right.
You can actually train a community member, and we have very good examples in other parts of the world where community took lead in dispersing medicine. So you don't have to go always to the hospital, which is stretching too much on health systems. So you kind of, human resources can be also, community health workers, which can take up not just only one disease. They can also be, once they train up, sometimes they get also overloaded,
right,
and they will be the least paid, which is not really, which is not a real genuine thing to do. So I think it needs to be balanced in a way that, they also will get, and they become an active player and also a change agent in reality in terms of community engagement.
Oh, thank you so much. I wish we would have more conversations, but this is for Facebook. We only have a little bit of time to watch.
No problem.
But thank you very much for the information.
My pleasure.
shared.
My pleasure. My pleasure.